I stood at the boardroom table, heart pounding, as I pressed play on the recording, the one where my wife and my boss laughed about keeping their little secret. You could have heard a pin drop as their voices filled the room. I'm Nathan, a guy who never thought betrayal would come wearing a tailored suit and a wedding ring. But here's the twist, I didn't just walk away crushed, I made sure they became the headline they deserved. Have you ever faced a betrayal that shook you to the core? Tell me in the comments, would you fight back, or walk away? Nathan notices Carla's distant look during Thanksgiving dinner, her phone lighting up repeatedly. The dining room glowed under the soft chandelier, casting golden light over the turkey, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce spread across the long oak table. Nathan sat at the head, carving slices of turkey with careful precision, though his eyes strayed again and again to Carla, seated across from him. She laughed politely at their daughter Emily's joke, but her fingers hovered too long near the phone resting on the placemat. Every few minutes, the screen lit up, casting a pale glow on her cheek, and she would glance down as if the room around her had vanished. Nathan shifted in his chair, trying to focus on Emily recounting her latest hiking trip, but his mind pulled backward, to last Thanksgiving. He remembered Carla doubled over with laughter as he butchered the turkey, the pieces falling apart like a bad jigsaw puzzle. She had snapped photos of his attempt, teasing him for weeks afterward, her face bright and carefree. This year, though, her smile never quite reached her eyes, and Nathan's carving, though flawless, earned only a distracted "looks great, honey" before she turned back to her phone. The clatter of silverware and the murmur of voices filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of roasted turkey and the sweetness of pumpkin pie. Nathan poured another glass of wine for Carla, his fingers brushing hers briefly, but she barely acknowledged him. His heart tugged, a quiet ache spreading beneath the surface. Ellie appeared at the front door, wrapped in a plaid scarf and holding a pie in trembling hands. I brought my famous pumpkin pie, she announced, stepping inside as Emily rushed to help her. Nathan crossed the room with a warm smile. Ellie, you're a lifesaver. Carla's been waiting all day for that. Ellie's eyes sparkled as she unwrapped the pie, and for a few moments, the room warmed in a way Nathan hadn't realized he was craving. Ellie's presence brought a grounding calm, her gentle chatter filling the gaps left by Carla's distance. Over dessert, Nathan stole glances at Carla, noting the way her phone buzzed softly against the table, the faint lift at the corners of her mouth when she peeked at the screen. He tried to draw her back into the fold, recounting a clumsy attempt at fixing the garage door last weekend, earning chuckles from Emily and their son Josh. But Carla only offered a distracted laugh, fingers drumming lightly on her phone, eyes flicking between Nathan and the screen as though weighing where her attention belonged. Later, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Nathan moved through the dimly lit hallway, the murmur of Carla's voice drawing him toward the kitchen. The scent of leftover turkey lingered in the air, mingling with the faint smell of pine from the wreath on the door. He paused at the doorway, unseen, watching as Carla leaned against the counter, her face softened by a private smile, phone pressed to her ear. I miss you too, she whispered, her voice low and tender. Nathan's breath caught. The walls around him seemed to tilt, the steady world he knew suddenly off-kilter. His fingers curled against the doorframe, heartbeat pounding in his ears as he strained to catch the rest of the conversation, but Carla's voice dropped even softer, the words dissolving into a quiet giggle. He backed away slowly, steps soundless against the hardwood floor. The house, moments ago filled with warmth and family, now felt foreign, each familiar corner casting unfamiliar shadows. Nathan stood in the dark hallway, heart sinking, wondering what's happening. Nathan returns to work Monday and notices Mark's car already parked outside, unusual for the CEO. The chill of a late November morning bit through Nathan's coat as he crossed the parking lot, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other. His eyes flicked toward the sleek black car parked near the entrance, the unmistakable European sedan Mark favored. It was barely 7:30 a.m. Mark was never in this early. Nathan's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of unease tracing through his chest as he entered the building. Inside, the lobby was already adorned with garlands twined around the railings and a tall Christmas tree blinking softly in the corner. The smell of pine mixed with the faint aroma of coffee wafting from the break room. Nathan moved through the quiet office, nodding at early risers and exchanging the usual pleasantries. but as he approached the executive hallway, the low murmur of voices drifted toward him, laughter echoing faintly off the polished floors. Turning the corner, Nathan slowed. Carla stood near Mark's office, head tilted slightly, laughter spilling easily from her lips. Mark, tall and sharply dressed, leaned in just a touch too close, flashing his practiced, charming smile. Their heads bent together over a phone screen, Carla's hand brushing his arm briefly as she laughed at something Nathan couldn't hear. Nathan's steps hesitated before he continued walking, forcing a neutral smile as Mark glanced up and offered a casual wave. "Morning, Nathan," Mark called, voice smooth as ever. "Morning," Nathan replied, keeping his tone light, his gaze drifting to Carla for a heartbeat before moving on. Her smile faltered just a second as she met his eyes, then brightened again as she turned back to Mark. Nathan reached his office, closing the door gently behind him. He sank into his chair, staring at the reports on his desk but reading none of them. His mind drifted back to Carla's voice a few days ago, whispering in their kitchen, "I miss you too." He clenched his jaw briefly before shaking it off, forcing himself to focus. Maybe he was reading too much into hallway banter. Maybe. By mid-morning, the office buzzed to life. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, the murmur of conversations floated past his door. Nathan made his way to the break room, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around him like a brief comfort. Beth stood at the counter, pouring herself a cup, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears. "Morning, Nathan," she greeted, her voice quiet but warm. "Morning, Beth." Nathan grabbed a mug, trying to will his shoulders to relax. Beth glanced around briefly, then leaned in just a fraction, her voice dropping. "You heard the latest office gossip?" Nathan arched a brow. "No. Should I have?" Beth offered a small, careful smile. "Let's just say some people are watching the late nights between Carla and Mark. You know how people talk." Her eyes held his for a moment, steady and kind. Nathan swallowed, his fingers tightening briefly on his coffee cup. Before he could respond, Beth straightened, her voice lightening as another colleague passed by. "See you at the meeting, Nathan." Back in his office, Nathan tried to bury himself in spreadsheets and emails, but the image of Carla's laughter in the hallway kept circling back. By lunchtime, he found himself stepping outside, needing air. The cold bit at his skin, but he welcomed the sharpness, letting it clear his head. "Mind if I join you?" Samuel's voice carried over the sidewalk, calm and deliberate. Nathan turned to see the older man approaching, a gentle smile under his salt and pepper mustache. Samuel was one of the board's longest-serving members, a steady hand in the often churning waters of the company. "Of course," Nathan replied, falling into step beside him. They walked toward a corner cafe, the smell of fresh pastries drifting out to the street. Inside, they found a small table near the window, watching passers-by hurry along bundled in coats and scarves. "I hear you've had a lot on your plate," Samuel began, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Mark's been making waves." Nathan offered a wry smile. "That's one way to put it." Samuel's eyes softened. "Be careful, Nathan. Mark's ambition doesn't always leave room for others. And not every ally is as loyal as they seem." The words lingered between them as they sipped their coffee, the warmth a small shield against the chill outside. Later that afternoon, Nathan returned to the office, his mind a slow churn of Samuel's quiet warning and Beth's subtle tip. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and as he pulled it free, a message notification flashed across the screen, Carla's phone, left on his desk by mistake. He froze, eyes locking on the previewed text. Friday was unforgettable. His chest tightened. Nathan stared at the screen, the words burned into his mind, his fingers hovering as though touching it would make the meaning clearer, or shatter what little doubt he still held. For a long moment, the world seemed to narrow around him, the low hum of voices outside his door, the soft clatter of keyboards, the faint scent of pine and coffee. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a slow breath. Not here. Not now. Slowly, deliberately, Nathan set the phone back down, his hand resting on it for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Nathan debates confronting Carla but pockets his suspicions for now. Nathan attends a formal board dinner, watching Mark praise Carla's PR success. The warm glow of chandeliers bathed the upscale Denver steakhouse in soft amber light, casting a golden sheen across polished mahogany tables dressed in white linens. Nathan sat among colleagues and board members, swirling a glass of Cabernet he barely tasted. Outside the wide windows, snowflakes drifted lazily from the dark sky, settling softly on the sidewalk. Inside, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of polite conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional peal of laughter. Mark stood at the head of the table, raising his glass, his polished cufflinks catching the light as he gestured to Carla. To Carla, Mark said, voice smooth and confident, a practiced public speaker. Her campaign this quarter exceeded every target we set, bringing us not only record numbers but a fresh image for the company. His gaze lingered on Carla just a fraction too long, the corner of his mouth lifting in a private smile. Carla flushed slightly, her lips parting in a modest laugh, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The room erupted in applause and cheers, but Nathan sat still, his smile brittle. He watched the way Mark leaned toward Carla, the casual touch on her shoulder, the light in her eyes as she looked up at him. Nathan remembered, with a faint pang, Carla's words from years ago, "I hate these corporate dinners. They're all fake smiles and meaningless toasts." But tonight, she seemed radiant, as if she belonged here more than anywhere else. Beth, seated beside Nathan, shifted slightly, her hand brushing his under the table. He turned to her, startled, and she leaned in, slipping a small USB drive into his palm. "You need to see this," she whispered, her breath a warm thread against the shell of his ear. Nathan's fingers closed around the device as if it might burn him, pulse thrumming in his throat. For the rest of the dinner, Nathan moved through the motions, smiling at jokes, nodding at conversations, raising his glass when Mark gestured his way. But beneath the surface, his mind churned. His gaze kept sliding back to Carla, noting the way her laughter rang just a little too brightly when Mark leaned in, the way her eyes flicked to Mark even when speaking to others. When the dinner finally drew to a close, coats were gathered, goodbyes exchanged, and cars called to the valet. Nathan drove home through a thin veil of snow, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the quiet night. The USB felt heavy in his pocket, pressing against his leg as if demanding his attention. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't notice the holiday lights blinking softly on neighborhood houses, didn't register the familiar curve of their driveway as he pulled in. Inside the house, the silence wrapped around him like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. Carla, chatting with Mark on the phone as they each returned to their homes, retreated into the bedroom with a murmured, "Just need to check a few emails." Nathan sat in his home office, the glow of the computer's screen illuminating the sharp lines of his face as he inserted the USB. Folders opened, timestamps, security camera footage, audio clips. His pulse quickened as he clicked on the first video. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen, the empty office after hours, the corridor dimly lit. Carla appeared, heels clicking softly against the tile, Mark close behind. They entered Mark's office, and though the angle showed only partial views, the silhouettes spoke volumes, Mark leaning close, Carla laughing softly, their heads almost touching. At one point, Mark's hand brushed her arm, she didn't pull away. Nathan's throat tightened. He clicked to the next file. More of the same. Carla at Mark's desk, her posture relaxed, his leaning against the edge, their voices indistinct but their body language unmistakable. A final clip played, Carla standing, Mark reaching out, fingers grazing hers, the door closing softly behind them. Nathan's face tightened as he whispered, "It's worse than I thought." The words escaped before he realized he'd spoken, the room swallowing the sound. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling faintly, as if his body hadn't quite caught up with what his mind now knew. He leaned back slowly, the leather chair creaking under his weight, eyes fixed on the frozen image on the screen. The laughter from the dinner echoed faintly in his memory, clashing with the hollow quiet of the house. The smell of leftover roast and faint perfume lingered in the air, but to Nathan, the room felt sterile, foreign. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Outside, the snowfall thickened, blanketing the streets in white. Nathan stared at the computer screen all night, mind racing. Nathan meets Beth at a local diner at dawn, the coffee steaming between them. The soft pink glow of sunrise barely crept over the snowy rooftops as Nathan slipped into the old-school Denver diner. The bell above the door jingled, its cheerful chime at odds with the heaviness in his chest. Vinyl booths lined the windows, and chrome-trimmed tables gleamed under dim pendant lights. The scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee hung in the air, warm and familiar, and for a fleeting moment, Nathan felt the ache of normalcy, something that now seemed to belong to another life. Beth was already seated in a corner booth, a pale blue folder on the table, fingers wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee. She looked up as Nathan approached, her eyes shadowed but steady. He slid into the booth across from her without a word, the warmth of the coffee between them filling the brief silence. "I dug deeper," Beth murmured, nudging the folder toward him. "Mark's got a pattern. He moves people up, wins their loyalty, then sidelines anyone who questions him." Her voice softened, her eyes flicking up to meet his. Carla wasn't the first person he charmed into his circle. Nathan let the words settle, his fingers brushing the edge of the folder but not opening it yet. He thought of Carla's easy laugh at the board dinner, her glowing smile as Mark toasted her, and something inside him hollowed out further. He remembered when they were newly married, when Carla would have rolled her eyes at men like Mark, mocking the corporate arrogance over late-night pizza. Now, the woman in those office clips felt like a stranger. Beth reached across, her hand resting lightly on his wrist. "You're not crazy, Nathan. The numbers don't lie." She drew back and sipped her coffee, waiting. Finally, Nathan opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, financial transfers, and project memos, each page a brick in the growing wall between his past and present. His eyes moved over the figures, the timestamps, the subtle but unmistakable threads tying Carla to Mark, not just professionally, but personally. His breath tightened in his chest, his heartbeat a slow drumbeat in his ears. "I keep thinking," Nathan murmured, voice raw, "maybe there's still some explanation. Some part of this I'm missing." Beth's gaze softened. "I wish you were. But Mark, he's been doing this dance for years. You're the first one smart enough to stand still and watch." They sat for a long moment, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation around them filling the silence. A waitress passed by, topping off their mugs without asking. Outside, the streets gleamed with fresh snow, the early traffic slow and careful. Nathan traced a fingertip over the rim of his mug, shoulders tight beneath his coat. Somewhere beneath the heartbreak, a sharper edge stirred, a cold, deliberate determination beginning to rise through the fog. He exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible over the jazz crackling softly from the diner speakers. When Nathan arrived home, Ellie was waiting on the porch, bundled in a thick coat and clutching a small foil-wrapped package. "I figured you might want a slice of that pie," she said with a small, knowing smile. Her breath hung in pale clouds as she spoke, her eyes kind but sharp as they studied his face. Nathan managed a faint smile. "You always know." Ellie followed him inside, setting the pie on the kitchen counter. She didn't press, didn't pry, just sat with him for a while at the table, sipping tea and chatting lightly about the neighborhood, the upcoming Christmas concert, and the stray cat she'd seen near the back fence. Her quiet presence wrapped around him like a soft blanket, grounding him in a world that still made sense. As dusk settled and Ellie rose to leave, Nathan walked her to the door, watching her fade into the snowy twilight. Alone again, he stood in the hallway, the house still and quiet around him. He caught sight of himself in the mirror near the coat rack, eyes shadowed, jaw tight, the lines on his face sharper than he remembered. Nathan looked into a mirror and quietly said, "They have no idea who they're dealing with." The words tasted like steel, cold and certain. He turned on his heel, reached for his phone, and typed out a message with steady fingers. Nathan texts Beth, "We go to the board." Nathan walks into the office with a quiet determination, feeling the weight of betrayal but not showing it. The morning cold bit into Nathan's cheeks as he strode through the revolving doors of the office building, his breath briefly fogging in the crisp December air. Inside, the lobby was awash with festive touches, garlands draped over the railings, a massive tree shimmering with gold ornaments, and the faint sound of Christmas carols drifting from hidden speakers. Nathan took it all in with a faint flicker of detachment, the sparkle and music brushing past him like a scene glimpsed through glass. He passed the receptionist with a nod, ignoring the usual small talk, and moved through the familiar corridors, his steps steady but his mind racing. Ellie's words echoed softly in his thoughts, "Strength doesn't need noise to be real." He clung to that reminder like a lifeline, forcing his shoulders to stay relaxed, his face composed, even as the undercurrent of anger and heartbreak simmered just beneath the surface. In the quiet of the server room, Nathan found Beth already waiting. The faint hum of machines filled the space, blue and green lights blinking in orderly rows. Beth handed him a flash drive, her face pale but determined. "Access logs, private emails, and, well, let's just say Mark's been sloppy," Beth murmured, glancing toward the closed door. "This should tie the offshore transfers to his personal account. Carla's name shows up, too, consulting payments, expense reimbursements, you name it." Nathan closed his fingers around the small device, exhaling slowly. "You're sure this is enough?" Beth nodded once. "It's more than enough." They exchanged a brief look, no need for more words, before slipping out, one at a time, blending back into the flow of the office. Back at his desk, Nathan felt Carla's presence before he saw her. She hovered near the doorway, fingers tapping lightly on the frame, a carefully casual smile playing on her lips. "Hey," she said, drawing out the word just slightly. "You're quiet today." Nathan met her gaze evenly. "Lots on my plate." Carla tilted her head, her eyes flicking across his face, searching. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Nathan answered softly, his tone giving nothing away. He watched as a flicker of unease passed through her eyes, though she quickly masked it with a breezy laugh. "Well, if you need anything, I'm around." She lingered a second longer, then turned, her perfume trailing faintly in the air as she disappeared down the hallway. Later in the afternoon, Samuel approached, hands tucked into his pockets, his usual calm expression edged with quiet curiosity. "Nathan," he said with a small, knowing smile, "walk with me?" They made their way to a quiet corner near the back atrium, where soft light filtered through frosted windows and the murmur of holiday chatter felt comfortably distant. Samuel didn't speak at first, merely gazing out over the snowy street below, his breath fogging the glass. "I've been watching," Samuel said at last, his voice low. "Mark moves fast, but not always carefully. And you," his eyes shifted toward Nathan, "you're steadier than most." Nathan remained silent, waiting. "I trust you'll do the right thing," Samuel murmured, clapping a hand briefly on Nathan's shoulder before strolling away, leaving behind a faint scent of cologne and the quiet weight of his words. Evening settled slowly over the office, the glow of holiday lights reflecting in the glass panels, the soft strains of carols wrapping around the space like an echo of a simpler time. Nathan returned to his desk, the flash drive cool in his pocket, the pieces falling quietly into place in his mind. His phone buzzed once. He drew it from his jacket, thumb brushing over the screen. Beth texts Nathan, "We found the smoking gun." Nathan stays up late, staring at the financial records, the house cold and still. The glow of the computer screen cast long shadows across the small home office, its pale light washing Nathan's face in soft blue. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, the faint clicking of the mouse the only sound in the room. Outside the window, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the yard in quiet white, the world muffled under its weight. Somewhere deep in the house, the old furnace gave a groan before clicking off, leaving the air cool and still. Nathan's eyes scanned down rows of figures on the screen, bonus payouts, consulting fees, reimbursement claims, transfers marked special project, each one a thread pulling the fabric of his life apart. His jaw tightened as he scrolled back to the beginning, a sick feeling blooming low in his chest. Carla's name appeared over and over in the records, tucked neatly into lines of numbers and brief descriptions, each entry a quiet betrayal spelled out in decimal points. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He could hear her voice in memory, Carla, years ago, standing in the kitchen after they bought the house, her laughter dancing through the room as she promised, "No secrets between us, right?" Nathan swallowed hard, the echo of that promise twisting like a knot in his throat. Footsteps creaked down the hallway, soft against the hardwood floor. Nathan straightened, schooling his expression as Carla appeared in the doorway. She wore an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, a casual softness that once would have stirred an ache of affection in him. Now it felt foreign, like watching a stranger in familiar clothes. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked lightly, though her eyes flickered to the screen behind him. "Just catching up on some reports," Nathan murmured, careful to keep his voice even. Carla leaned against the doorframe, her fingers twining together. "You've been quiet lately." Nathan turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "Lots on my mind." For a heartbeat, Carla looked as though she might say more. Her mouth parted, her eyes softened, but then, just as quickly, she smiled, light and airy. "Don't work too late," she said, retreating into the hall with a wave over her shoulder. The click of the bedroom door closing echoed faintly through the house. Nathan let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging as the tension coiled back through his body. An hour later, a soft knock rattled the front door. Nathan pulled himself from the chair, his legs stiff as he moved through the darkened house. When he opened the door, Ellie stood on the porch, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, a small plate of Christmas cookies cradled in her gloved hands. Her porch across the street twinkled with colored lights, their glow casting gentle halos in the falling snow. "I saw your office light," Ellie said with a small, knowing smile. "Figured you could use a little sugar." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest at the sight of her. "You're too good to me, Ellie." She stepped inside just far enough to press the plate into his hands, the smell of sugar and cinnamon drifting between them. "We all need a little sweetness when the world feels sharp," Ellie murmured. Her eyes searched his face, calm and kind. She didn't ask questions, didn't press, just stood there, a quiet anchor in the storm Nathan was barely holding back. "Thank you," Nathan said softly, the words carrying more weight than the moment required. Ellie gave a gentle squeeze to his arm before slipping back into the night, her boots crunching softly through the snow. Nathan returned to his office, the cookies untouched on the desk beside him. The computer screen flickered as he brought up one last report, his fingers tightening on the mouse. His eyes moved across the numbers, reading the story they told, piecing together the pattern, the timeline, the betrayals woven through bank accounts and meeting minutes. Nathan quietly says to himself, "This ends tomorrow." His voice barely stirred the air, but the resolve in it settled deep in his chest. Just as he reached to shut the computer down, a sharp buzz from the kitchen cut through the quiet. Nathan stiffened, rising slowly, his footsteps soundless on the floor. Carla's phone lay on the counter, its screen glowing with a text preview. "Big day tomorrow," the message read. "Mark." Nathan stood there, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the stillness. The snow outside continued to fall, soft and relentless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Nathan enters the boardroom, clutching a folder that feels heavier than it should. The sound of Nathan's shoes echoed softly down the marble hallway as he approached the boardroom, his grip firm around the thick folder in his hand. Tall windows lined the corridor, and outside, snow drifted silently past, swirling under the pale winter sky. The scent of pine and cinnamon from the decorated Christmas tree in the lobby drifted faintly into the air, but Nathan barely noticed. His shoulders were squared, his jaw set, and beneath the cool calm of his expression, his pulse thudded with quiet determination. As he reached for the polished brass handle, Beth's words came back to him, steady, reassuring, "Be calm. Let them walk into their own trap." He drew in a slow breath, straightened his coat, and stepped into the room. The boardroom was a study in sleek modern elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the snowy cityscape, while the long mahogany table gleamed under pendant lights. Around it, the board members murmured among themselves, a mix of anticipation and polite holiday cheer in the air. A carafe of coffee sat steaming near the end of the table, flanked by silver trays of pastries. Mark stood near the head of the table, his smile polished to a gleam, gesturing smoothly as he spoke with two directors. His deep navy suit hugged his athletic frame, and his cufflinks flashed as he turned, a picture of effortless authority. "Nathan." Mark called, spreading his arms slightly as Nathan entered. "Good to see you, my friend. Ready to wrap up the year on a high note?" His grin was easy, confident, untouched by doubt. Nathan offered a small smile, moving toward his seat at the far end. "It'll certainly be a memorable meeting," he said softly, laying the folder on the table with deliberate care. Mark's grin flickered, a faint crease touching his brow before he smoothed it away. Carla entered moments later, her heels clicking smartly on the floor. Her hair was swept back, her black blazer sharp against a cream blouse. She offered a bright smile to the room, but when her eyes met Nathan's, there was a momentary hesitation, just a flicker, before she turned to greet Mark with an air kiss on the cheek. Nathan's stomach turned, but outwardly, he remained still, folding his hands loosely on the table. As the meeting was called to order, Mark launched into his report with the same charismatic ease he always wielded. He praised the company's year-end numbers, highlighted Carla's contributions to the public relations campaigns, and dropped subtle references to his unwavering team. The board members nodded, some smiling, others murmuring approval. Nathan waited. He waited as Mark moved into financial projections. He waited as Carla handed out glossy reports. And when Mark gestured toward him with that same polished smile, "Nathan, anything to add on the operational side?" Nathan rose, his fingers brushing the folder, and the room shifted. "Actually," Nathan said, his voice calm, steady, "there are a few things we need to discuss." Mark's smile twitched, and Carla's fingers froze briefly on the rim of her water glass. Nathan opened the folder and began to lay out pages, sliding them methodically across the table: bank statements, email printouts, time-stamped records of transfers. His voice never wavered, never rose, each word measured, each pause deliberate. "These documents," Nathan said evenly, "show a pattern of misused funds, transfers labeled as consulting fees, reimbursements for non-existent expenses, and discretionary bonuses authorized without board approval. They link to offshore accounts, as well as personal accounts tied to both Mark and Carla." The silence deepened, rippling outward like a stone cast into water. One board member adjusted his glasses sharply, another leaned forward, brows drawing together. Carla cleared her throat. "Nathan, this is..." He held up a hand, eyes still on the room. "Please, Carla. You'll have a chance to speak." She froze, her mouth closing slowly. Nathan continued, his voice cutting through the thickening tension. "Beyond the financial irregularities, we've also gathered evidence of internal communications, emails that detail an inappropriate personal relationship between two senior executives." His eyes flicked briefly to Mark, whose expression had hardened into a thin, fixed smile. Samuel, seated near the window, folded his hands carefully, watching Nathan with quiet, assessing eyes. Finally, Nathan reached the final item in the folder, a small digital recorder. He placed it on the table, pressing the button. The room filled with the unmistakable voices of Mark and Carla, laughing softly, murmuring plans, speaking with a careless intimacy that had no place in a professional setting. And then, clear as glass, Mark's voice, saying, "Once the board signs off on this deal, we can make our move." Nathan won't know what hit him. A sharp inhale broke the stillness. Someone set their coffee cup down too hard, the soft clink loud in the quiet room. Carla's face had gone pale, her hands curled tightly in her lap. Mark's jaw clenched, his gaze darting between the board members, searching for some foothold, some thread of control to grab hold of. Nathan watched them both, his heart hammering steadily in his chest, though his face remained composed. Mark's face drains of color as Nathan says, "We're done here." The words hung in the air, simple, unadorned, final. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Samuel leaned back slightly, his mouth twitching into the faintest trace of a smile. Beth's eyes met Nathan's across the table, a flicker of quiet triumph passing between them. The Christmas tree in the lobby twinkled faintly through the glass door, its lights a soft echo against the stark clarity of the room. Snow continued to fall outside, whispering against the windows as the old order shifted quietly into something new. Nathan steps outside, snowflakes melting on his skin as the cold air hits his face. the heavy glass doors of the office building closed behind him with a soft, deliberate hush, cutting off the muffled voices and hurried footsteps still rustling inside. Nathan stood on the front steps, the cold December air wrapping around him like a sudden baptism. He drew in a deep breath, the sting of frost sharp in his lungs, and tilted his face upward, letting the snowflakes drift against his skin and dissolve on contact. For a moment, his hands dangled at his sides, fingers unclenched, a strange weightlessness filling the space where tension had lived for weeks. Around him, the city stirred. A few reporters loitered near the entrance, their breath misting as they waited for scraps of reaction. Camera lights flashed briefly, and a voice called, "Mr. Wade. Any comment on the board decision?" Nathan turned, his coat buttoned high against his neck, and offered a calm, measured nod. "I trust the board's judgment," he said simply. "We'll rebuild, and we'll move forward with integrity." Beth slipped past him a few moments later, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of warmth. Samuel followed, his hand resting briefly on Nathan's shoulder as they exchanged a quiet wordless look of mutual respect. Behind them, Mark's figure was ushered through the side exit, his face pale and tight-lipped, a man slipping from power faster than he could grasp at the edges. Nathan watched him go without a word. By the time Nathan arrived home, the sun was dipping low, casting a pale gold light across the snowy rooftops. The house stood quiet, its windows glowing faintly, the wreath on the front door dusted with fresh snow. As Nathan stepped inside, he heard the soft scuff of footsteps. Carla stood near the hallway, coat still on, her eyes wide and damp. "Nathan," she began, her voice cracking faintly. "Please, can we just talk?" He paused in the doorway, the cold still clinging to his skin, the rush of the day's events echoing in his bones. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Carla took a hesitant step forward, her fingers twitching at her sides. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. "I was lost, Nathan. And her breath hitched. "I didn't know how to fix it." Nathan looked at her, his heart a slow, quiet ache inside his chest. He thought of Ellie's voice in his mind, "Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's what you do next." He let out a slow breath and met Carla's pleading eyes. "I need space," he said softly, the words shaped carefully, without anger. "And maybe you do too." Carla's shoulders sagged, a soft sound escaping her, part sigh, part sob. She gave a faint nod, her hands curling around her coat buttons, as though holding herself together by sheer will. Later that evening, Nathan found himself standing at Ellie's porch, the glow of her Christmas lights casting a gentle warmth against the winter dark. She opened the door with her usual quiet grace, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she motioned him inside. But Nathan shook his head gently. "Can we just sit a while?" he asked. Ellie smiled softly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as they settled onto the porch chairs, steaming mugs of tea between them. For a long while, they said little, watching the snow fall, the world hushed and still. Occasionally, Ellie reached over, patting his hand lightly, a quiet anchor beside him. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the tea seep into his fingers, the crisp air bite at his cheeks. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's wind chime jingled softly, a tender, almost fragile sound. Back home, as Nathan slipped off his coat, his phone buzzed on the hallway table. He picked it up, the screen casting a faint glow in the dim room. Beth's name lit up. The message was simple. "The press wants your statement." "What should I tell them?" Nathan stood in the doorway, the hush of the house pressing around him, the question hanging lightly in the air like the snow outside. Nathan wakes up to the sound of his name on the morning news. The soft murmur of the television seeped into Nathan's dreams, tugging him from restless sleep. His eyes fluttered open, and for a disoriented moment, he stared at the ceiling, the faint blue light of dawn slipping through the window blinds. It took a beat before the words filtered through. "Nathan Wade, the company's longtime operations head, has emerged at the center of this week's corporate shakeup." Nathan sat up slowly, the familiar weight of weariness pressing across his shoulders. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, planting his feet on the cool wood floor, and padded to the kitchen. The TV flickered softly on the counter, the local anchor's polished voice contrasting sharply with the steam hissing from his coffee pot. On screen, images flashed, a file photo of Nathan at a company retreat, a clip of Mark escorted from the building, Carla turning her face from cameras. The crawl at the bottom read, "Corporate scandal unfolds, local executive steps into leadership role amidst controversy." Nathan ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly as he poured coffee into a chipped mug. He remembered Beth's words from the night before, "The truth has a way of making noise." The noise was here, all right, and it was only just beginning. By mid-morning, Nathan made his way to the local coffee shop, the bell over the door jingling softly as he stepped inside. The familiar smell of roasted beans, warm pastries, and worn wooden floors greeted him, as did the quiet hum of conversation. A few heads turned when he entered, and there was a flicker of hush as people briefly glanced his way. But then, as if on cue, they returned to their coffees, their newspapers, their laptops. Ellie sat at her usual corner table, a knitting project in her lap, and gave him a warm, understated smile. One of the baristas, a young man with sandy hair Nathan barely knew, offered a quiet nod and said, "First cups on us today, Mr. Wade." Nathan offered a small smile in return. It wasn't much, but the quiet support wrapped around him like an old, familiar quilt. Beth arrived minutes later, sliding into the seat across from him, tablet in hand. Her hair was tucked under a wool cap, and a sharp glint of determination lit her eyes. "We're managing it," she said without preamble, setting the tablet down between them. "The press is already shifting focus, Mark's been spotted lawyering up, and Carla's statement to the board is making its rounds." Nathan stirred his coffee absently, the swirl of cream making slow clouds. "What's next?" Beth's mouth tightened slightly. "The reporters want a personal statement from you. Something about the transition, the company culture, keeping the tone steady, reassuring. We can draft it, or," her voice softened. "You can speak it yourself." Before Nathan could answer, his phone buzzed on the table. Carla's name lit the screen. He stared at it for a long moment before finally picking up. "Nathan," Carla's voice came, soft, almost fragile. "Can we meet? Just to talk?" Nathan's fingers tightened briefly around the phone. For a moment, he imagined telling her no, cutting it off cleanly. But instead, he heard himself say, "Somewhere neutral." Carla exhaled on the other end. "Thank you." The conversation ended as quietly as it began, and Nathan sat there, fingers drumming once against the cup, then going still. The snow outside fell in slow, graceful spirals, dusting the windowsills and the streets beyond. Ellie passed by on her way out, gently tapping his shoulder as she did. No words, just a light squeeze and a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Nathan's gaze followed her to the door, watched as she stepped into the snow, her red scarf bright against the pale morning. Back at the corporate lobby later, the reporters gathered again, cameras poised, pens ready. Nathan paused in the glass entryway, watching them through the reflections. He felt the weight of it all, the scandal, the loss, the rebuild ahead. And yet beneath it ran something steadier, something he hadn't expected, a flicker of resolve, quiet but unshaken. That night, standing by the window of his living room, Nathan looked out at the falling snow, the streetlights casting soft halos in the dark. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, older, perhaps, but still standing. He wondered aloud, voice barely above a whisper, "Is this the end or the start?" Nathan and Carla meet in a snow-covered park, no cameras, just cold truth. The park was hushed under the weight of fresh snow, the benches lined with soft white mounds, and the trees stretching their bare, spindly arms toward a pale sky. Nathan stood near the edge of the path, his breath curling visibly in the frigid air as he watched Carla approach. Her dark coat stood out sharply against the pale backdrop, and for a brief moment, Nathan was pulled backward in time, back to a spring day when they stood before friends and family, hands clasped tightly, vowing no matter what. Carla slowed as she reached him, her boots crunching softly on the packed snow. She offered a hesitant, almost shy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nathan inclined his head slightly, his face composed, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat. "Thank you for meeting me," Carla said quietly, folding her arms over her chest as if bracing herself against more than just the cold. Nathan gave a small nod but didn't speak, letting the silence stretch between them. The world around them was peaceful, muffled by the snow. A few children's voices rang out faintly in the distance, laughter from a sledding hill, the sound oddly tender in the heavy stillness. Carla shifted her weight, looking down at her boots, then up at Nathan, her expression tight with apology and regret. She started, then stopped, drawing a shaky breath. I need you to know, it wasn't about you not being enough. Her voice cracked, and she blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. It was me. I was lonely, Nathan. And I was stupid and selfish and so scared to say the words out loud, so I buried them. And it all just spiraled. Nathan's jaw worked slightly, but his voice remained calm when he spoke. Why, Mark? Carla let out a soft, pained laugh. Because he saw me. Or at least, I thought he did. And then it was just easy. Too easy to believe the lies I was telling myself. Nathan nodded slowly, his breath rising in steady clouds as he processed her words. Did you ever think, he asked quietly, to tell me what you were missing before you went looking for it somewhere else? Carla closed her eyes briefly, her shoulders sinking. I did, she whispered. But by the time I understood how far I'd wandered, I was already afraid it was too late. And I didn't want to face what it would break. Nathan studied her for a long moment, his heart heavy but oddly still. And here we are, he murmured, glancing around at the quiet park, the bare trees, the pale sky above. Carla sniffed softly, brushing a hand under her eye. I'm sorry I broke us, she said, her voice trembling just enough to reveal the weight she was carrying. Nathan's mouth softened at the corners, his eyes steady and sad. I'm sorry too, he replied simply, the words falling between them like a benediction, a release. For a beat, neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Carla took a small step back, her boots crunching faintly. I won't ask you for anything, she said, voice quiet but sure. But I wanted you to hear that from me, not the papers, not the lawyers. Nathan gave a faint nod, his hands still in his pockets, his posture steady. Thank you, he said, and meant it. Carla turned slowly, her figure retreating down the path, each step marked in the snow. Nathan watched her go, his breath curling in the air, the cold stinging his cheeks. He stood there long after she disappeared from view, his heart heavy yet unburdened in a way it hadn't been for weeks. The snow drifted down gently, collecting on his shoulders, softening the sharp lines of grief and anger into something quieter, something almost like peace. Nathan watches Carla walk away, breath visible in the cold air. Nathan steps into his office as the new CEO, staff watching curiously. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the corporate tower, casting long, golden stripes across the floor as Nathan crossed the polished marble lobby. He could feel eyes on him, curious glances from assistants, nods from department heads, the subtle shifting of people recalibrating their sense of the man now at the helm. Nathan carried no briefcase, just a quiet, composed air, and in his mind, Samuel's words echoed softly, lead with your spine, not your fists. As he stepped into the executive floor, the hush in the air was almost reverent. Beth was already there, a mug of coffee balanced in one hand and a thick folder tucked under her arm. She caught his eye and offered a brief, genuine smile. Good morning, boss, she said lightly, a touch of warmth softening the formality. Nathan gave a small, amused shake of his head. Let's not overdo it, Beth. They settled briefly in his office, the morning sun painting soft patterns across the sleek wood surfaces. The familiar space looked somehow different now, not just because of the change in title, but because of the weight Nathan carried into it, the quiet resolve, the hard-won clarity, the lessons scraped from loss. They moved to the boardroom soon after, where the department heads gathered, some stiff with wariness, others subtly curious. Nathan greeted each person calmly, shaking hands, exchanging a few quiet words. When he took his seat at the head of the table, the room fell into an expectant hush. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying a steady authority. I know it's been a difficult few weeks, Nathan began, and I know trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But we are entering a new chapter, one built on transparency, accountability, and respect. As he outlined the new ethical guidelines, clear reporting lines, mandatory oversight for bonuses, a third-party audit of the previous quarter's finances, Nathan watched the tension shift. The skeptical look softened. Arms uncrossed. Nods replaced furrowed brows. Beth sat beside him, adding her own measured insights, her presence a clear symbol of the trust Nathan placed in her. By the time the meeting wrapped, there was a quiet murmur of approval, the undercurrent of doubt giving way to something cautiously hopeful. Back in his office, Samuel stepped in, a familiar figure in his sharp navy suit, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You did well," Samuel said, his voice low, approving. Nathan met his gaze, feeling something loosen in his chest, a faint but unmistakable lift. "Thank you, Samuel." With a small chuckle, Samuel reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a slim, silver pen, its surface softly worn with age. "My father gave this to me when I took over his business," Samuel said, holding it out. "It's seen more signatures than I can count, some of them disasters, some of them triumphs. Either way, it's yours now." Nathan took the pen carefully, feeling the cool metal against his palm. "I'll try to make it worthy." "I think you already have," Samuel murmured, giving him a firm squeeze on the shoulder before slipping out. That afternoon, Nathan stood at the press conference, cameras lining the back wall, the murmur of reporters filling the room. He stepped up to the podium, Beth standing just off to the side, and waited as the crowd quieted. "Today," Nathan began, "we turn the page. Our commitment is to rebuild trust, not just with shareholders, but with every member of this company, and with the community we serve." The flashes went off, the questions flew, but Nathan answered steadily, his voice sure, his posture grounded. He spoke of growth, of learning from past mistakes, of valuing people over profit, and each word seemed to chip away at the cloud that had hung over the company. As the press conference neared its end, a reporter raised her hand, a half-smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And personally, Mr. Keller," she asked lightly, "what comes next for you?" Nathan paused, his gaze flicking briefly to Beth, then to the crowd beyond. A faint smile curved his lips, wry, knowing, touched with the weight of everything that had led him here. He gave a small, knowing smile. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing not just the image of a new CEO, but the quiet beginning of a man reshaping his future. Nathan helps Ellie hang Christmas lights on her porch. The cold bit gently at Nathan's fingers as he steadied the ladder, glancing up to where Ellie balanced on the second rung, her gloved hands looping a string of twinkling lights around the porch eaves. The pale winter sun filtered through bare branches, casting soft shadows over the snow-dusted yard. Nathan reached up instinctively as Ellie leaned slightly, holding the ladder firm. "You've got steadier hands than I thought," Ellie called down with a teasing smile, her cheeks pink from the cold. Nathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've been underestimated before," he murmured, his voice carrying just enough warmth to make Ellie glance down, her smile softening. They worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the faint clink of the light bulbs, the crunch of their boots on the snow-packed walkway, and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. When the last strand was plugged in, Ellie stepped back, her face lighting up as the porch glowed in soft gold and white. Nathan found himself smiling, not just at the lights but at the quiet, simple moment itself. Later that afternoon, Nathan stood at the edge of the town's small charity event, watching as children bundled in bright coats darted between tables, clutching paper snowflakes and gingerbread cookies. The local hall had been transformed with evergreen garlands and red ribbons, laughter echoing through the space as neighbors mingled and old songs played softly in the background. Beth found him near the coffee table, a mug in each hand. "Thought you could use this," she said, passing him one. Nathan accepted it with a grateful nod, their fingers brushing briefly. They stood side by side, watching the townspeople drift past, familiar faces, easy greetings, nods of quiet approval. Beth nudged him lightly. "You know, people notice when you show up," she murmured. Nathan glanced at her, then around the room. "It's nice to be seen for the right reasons this time." Beth smiled, a flash of the camaraderie they'd always shared, now easier, freer. They talked for a while, about the company, the coming holidays, even a few light jabs at the mayor's terrible raffle jokes, until the evening wound down and people began filing out into the snow. By the time Nathan made his way to the local diner the next morning, the familiar bell over the door chimed, and a handful of regulars lifted their heads, smiles and nods greeting him. He slid into a booth by the window, the aroma of coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls filling the air. The waitress, who'd known him by name long before headlines ever had, poured his coffee with a wink. "Good to have you back, Nathan." Sitting there, Nathan felt a surprising ease settle into his chest. The past weeks, heavy as they had been, felt softened in the simple rhythm of small-town life, neighbors chatting over pancakes, Ellie waving as she passed outside, the quiet comfort of a place where people remembered who you were before the world changed. That afternoon, as Nathan walked home, he paused to watch a group of neighborhood kids tumble through the snow, their laughter high and clear as they flung handfuls at each other, their cheeks red and eyes shining. A quiet warmth spread through him, not the blazing triumph of headlines or boardroom victories, but something gentler, peace. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. Pulling it free, Nathan smiled as Beth's message appeared on the screen, "Coffee tomorrow?" He slipped the phone back into his coat, the smile still lingering on his lips as he turned toward home, the glow of Ellie's porch lights twinkling softly through the dusk. Nathan walks to the coffee shop on New Year's morning, snow crunching under his boots. The world was quiet, wrapped in a soft hush of snowfall as Nathan walked the familiar path toward the coffee shop, his breath rising in small clouds, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh white powder. The town still slept under a pale morning sky, windows dark, wreaths hanging slightly askew after the night's celebrations. Nathan pulled his coat a little tighter, the cold brushing his cheeks, but there was a calmness in his stride, an ease he hadn't felt in months. Ellie's words drifted back to him as he walked, "You're not done yet." He had thought, more than once over the past weeks, that maybe he was. But here he was, on the first morning of a new year, his feet moving forward on a path lined with small, ordinary beginnings. The coffee shop was warm and bustling, the scent of cinnamon and dark roast wrapping around him as soon as he pushed through the door. Beth sat near the window, waving him over with a grin, her cheeks still pink from the cold. Nathan joined her, brushing snow from his shoulders, and they exchanged a quiet laugh over the sight of the owner wrestling with a faulty string of lights near the counter. They sat with their mugs, the conversation light but meaningful, touching on the year behind and the one ahead. There was no rush, no urgency, just the comfort of two people sharing space and a new start. "You know," Beth said at one point, stirring her coffee, "resilience isn't about bouncing back. It's about carrying the cracks and still walking forward." Nathan smiled softly, his fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "Then I guess we're both in pretty good shape." Later, they left the coffee shop and strolled slowly through the town, the streets unusually quiet, the world bathed in a delicate light as the sun crept higher in the sky. Snowflakes caught in Beth's hair, and Nathan chuckled when she brushed them away with an exaggerated huff. They talked about work, about small changes, about learning to take deep breaths between the demands of the day. And when they parted ways at the corner, it was with an easy smile and a promise to catch up again soon. No wait, no expectation, just a gentle step into whatever came next. Nathan turned toward Ellie's house, stopping by her porch where she was already outside, sweeping snow from the steps. She looked up, her face lighting with the kind of warmth that didn't need words. "Happy New Year," Nathan called softly. Ellie leaned on her broom, smiling. "Back at you, Nathan. How's it feel to stand on the edge of something new?" He considered that, looking out across the snow-covered street, the houses lined up like quiet sentinels, the air crisp and full of possibility. "Feels pretty good," he admitted. Ellie chuckled, brushing a hand through her short silver hair. "Told you. You're not done yet." With a quiet wave, Nathan continued home, the path familiar but somehow changed. Inside, the house was still, sunlight pouring through the windows, glinting off picture frames and casting long, golden streaks across the floor. He moved into his home office, pausing as his gaze fell on the small framed quote he had placed carefully on the desk that morning. "Your past does not define you. Your response does." He rested his fingertips lightly on the frame, a soft breath leaving him, not heavy with grief or regret, but lightened by something quieter, acceptance, maybe, or simply peace. Drawn by some instinct, Nathan stepped outside once more, the door clicking softly behind him as he moved onto the porch. The town stretched out before him, the horizon glowing with the first rays of a New Year's sun. He inhaled deeply, the cold air filling his lungs, and let it out slowly, his breath a thin mist against the dawning light. The snow crunched softly under his feet as he stepped down, standing still for a moment in the chill morning air. The road ahead was wide open, unwritten, and for the first time in a long while, Nathan felt no fear in facing it. He took a deep, calm breath, watching the sun break free of the horizon, and let the quiet of the morning settle into his bones. On that quiet New Year's morning, Nathan discovered that peace doesn't come from erasing the past, but from learning to carry it with grace. His journey through betrayal and loss became a quiet testimony. Pain does not have to cost us our dignity, instead, it can teach us resilience and the freedom to choose our next steps. Like the soft glow of a porch light on a snowy evening, even small acts of kindness can guide us through life's darkest moments. As you reflect on this story, perhaps consider the quiet strengths in your own life, and how they've shaped the roads you walk today.